Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 207 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us for another edition here in 2023. We have another guest of the week this week. I think we're on a couple weeks roll here with a couple guests. It's been a while since we had a consecutive episode, I guess, list of guests here. And now we're getting the ball rolling here. He's a boxing writer where you've seen his work on sites such as Boxing News, Boxing Monthly, and he has currently his own website, boxingzombie.uk. Craig Scott joins us this week here on the Last Round. Thank you for joining us, Craig.
No, thanks for having me, guys. Been admiring your stuff from afar. I think I was just mentioning that before we started. You guys are churning stuff out year after year, so really good to be on here. And 207 is actually my lucky number, so very good to be on this episode as well. How are you guys?
We appreciate it. I think we were just talking about just before we started recording here that we've been interacting with our Twitter accounts and all that stuff for quite a few years, and we finally now linked up here to have you on as a guest. So we definitely appreciate your valuable time, especially being on the other side of the world and in a different time zone. We definitely appreciate that.
You guys said it was 11 a.m. and I said to my wife, I'm jumping on this podcast at 11 a.m. and she went, "Is that the one that's in America?" And I went, yeah. She went, "That would be like 3 a.m. there. Are you sure it's not 11 a.m. Pacific time?" I was like, I've just been sitting about since 11 a.m. this morning, UK time, waiting to speak to you guys. But it's good to be here. Thanks for having me on, man. Nice to speak to you.
Definitely. So let's jump right back into it. Fight reviews this past Saturday, the 21st of January, from the Manchester Arena in Manchester on Sky Pay-Per-View and DAZN in the United States. Okay. I was wrong last week. I don't know about Mike. I forgot who you picked, but I think you might have picked Smith. But I was definitely wrong because I went with Eubank Jr. just because I thought the size difference, and I thought Smith was a little bit more talented, but I thought the size difference and Eubank's the talent that he had already coming in, I thought, okay, that's just going to be a little bit too much. And then the size difference is going to be a crucial factor. Boy, was I wrong. But let's start with you, Craig. What was your reaction when the conclusion of this fight occurred?
Quite honestly, I couldn't believe it, Danny. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I thought, I was in the same boat as you. I thought Eubank was going to win. I actually fancied Eubank to stop Liam Smith. Size, speed, and even in the last couple of fights where he's had moments where he's taken his foot off the gas, he always looked as though he could turn it up a notch if he had to, and I expected him to do that. The bad blood throughout the week obviously added an extra element to the fight. And I just couldn't believe it. He looked very slow to get started, first couple of rounds. I didn't think there was much in the first couple of rounds. Third round, I thought he looked good. He was unloading that uppercut. He was catching Smith clean. Smith was standing very stationary, and I thought that was maybe a sign of what was to come. And then, the fourth round, I think all you have to do is scroll through the Twitter timeline and any other form of social media. People couldn't believe it. I didn't see many people picking Smith by stoppage. I read the Boxing News coverage. I read the BBC over here, had a predictions column. A few people picked Smith by decision. I didn't see anybody picking Smith confidently by stoppage, let alone in the first half of the fight. It was remarkable to watch. It was unusual to see Eubank crumpled in a heap, against the turnbuckle, and it was a bit of a strange ending. It just sort of seemed to come out of nowhere, caught everybody off guard.
Mike, what did you think about the fight?
Last week, I kind of said that I wanted to see which Eubank we were going to see. We were going to see the old school, kind of more pressure, a lot of punches thrown, or we're going to see that new style Roy Jones Jr., more technically trying to be a little bit more flamboyant. And early on, his jab he was doing really well with his jab, snapping that out there, kind of trying to keep Liam Smith at bay. But as Liam always does, he kind of starts off very slowly. And then as soon as he was kind of backed up on those ropes, you could see like, okay, here we go. And Liam Smith just unleashed. It was like 6, 7, 8, 9 punches that he threw. And obviously, Chris Eubank, couldn't dodge them all. And then that uppercut, I think, kind of started the downfall. And then I thought he was probably given a good chance by the referee just in case he could kind of shake it off because it was such a big fight. But Liam just jumped straight on him, and that was all that she wrote. Kind of looking back at it now, I think I should have, easy to say now, but I think Liam would have been the right pick, just because I don't think Eubank has ever really been properly tested, apart from obviously the couple of fights that he did lose. The one that I was kind of looking forward to before was the Matt Korobov fight, because he was such a big puncher. But obviously that, the injury, early on in the fight, and we never really got to sort of see anything out of that. So, I think Eubank really was just so popular just from how he is on social media and his interviews and his press conferences more than an actual end product.
Craig, I saw a tweet sometime yesterday after the fight that I forgot. It was just a random tweet, I think, in a reply in a certain thread about this fight. But it said something along the lines of that, and let me know if you agree with this or not, but Liam Smith rises to the occasion in bigger fights than Eubank. When Eubank's in bigger situations, he comes up on the losing end or on the unfortunate end, whereas Liam Smith has found himself on the victor side in most of the occasions that he's been. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I probably find it hard to argue with that, to be honest. I think, I was at Eubank Groves in the same arena, Manchester Arena, and I was quite confident that Groves would keep him on the end of the jab, and he was more used to the occasion following the massive events with Carl Froch. Eubank's career probably means that, that statement is going to be true, and it will continue to be true because he doesn't fight regularly enough. His level of competition dips and then it rises, and there's not really a consistent march towards the top level. You see him in the World Boxing Super Series, the super middleweight edition, and then after that he's fighting a guy that he shouldn't really be fighting, and it's really hard to kind of understand his career trajectory and what's been happening with Eubank Jr. I think a lot of that in the early days was to do with the interference of Eubank Sr. I think they were quite difficult to deal with, but it's certainly true. When he fought Billy Joe Saunders, he took far too long to get going, and he lost the fight. Obviously, it was quite close on the cards, but he lost the fight. Groves taught him a lesson, in terms of mastering a 12-round performance at that level. Last night, we seen him crumble before the halfway stage, and he never quite looked comfortable. It seems like, he talks the talk. I love the way he's been handling himself these last 6 months since the Benn fight. Kind of crumbled and fell through. But last night, something just seemed off. It seemed like he felt far too confident he was going to walk through Liam Smith. And it's been a long time coming that he's found himself in that kind of fight. He beat Liam Williams and put Liam Williams down 4 times, and he kind of cruised through that fight, although Williams gave him a couple of scary moments. But after that, he's beaten Liam. He's trying to fight Liam Smith and beat Liam Smith, who went to war with Liam Williams twice. It wasn't a significant step up, and he still fell short. And I wonder if it is the occasion or it's the stage, because obviously it was a massive event. It was a headline event on a pay-per-view card over here. Is it that gets the better of him more than the opponent? Because the opponent last night shouldn't have been a massive step up from people he's beaten recently.
For somebody like Liam Smith, especially after he had a couple of years ago, he had that loss to Jaime Munguia of Golden Boy Promotions. Even though it was a competitive fight, some people thought that maybe he should have received the victory there. He was trying to arrange a rematch, but Munguia's camp just wasn't seemingly having it. But ever since then, Liam Smith has really re-energized his career. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's always probably had quite a solid following here because of the Liverpool fan base, and he's obviously followed a couple of his brothers into professional boxing over here, and they've all done well. And Callum, the youngest, has followed him. So I think he's having a nice little swan song. You know, he dropped that decision in Russia, which was quite a contentious one. The guy he was fighting, his name escapes me now, but you know, I thought that was a very close fight, and that was when he was on the cusp of challenging for world titles. Bounced back from that nicely, and you know, his last couple of wins, he stopped Anthony Fowler, which was impressive. He fought Hassan. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that surname. But, you know, that was a kind of strange fight, didn't really tell as much. And then last night he just exploded in the fourth round. And it seems to me now, 34, it's remarkable to me that Liam Smith is older than Eubank. It feels like Eubank's been around for, you know, 15, 20 years as a professional fighter. So Smith is slightly older, man. If he's going to do anything significant, he's probably got to do it in the next 18 months to 2 years. But I think when you look at the division that he's competing in, you know, whether it's at 160 or it's back down at 154, you know, the world champions there, it's not going to be easy to capture a significant version of the world title, I think. So that'll be the toughest part, is who does he beat when you look out at the landscape? Who does he beat for a world title in either of those two divisions?
What did you think of the corner work, Craig, by McNally?
I really like McNally, Michael. I think you can tell from the fighters that are gravitating towards him now as well. Obviously, Josh Taylor's chosen to work with him. Kia McGarko, you know, promising Irish talent, he's chosen to work with him as well. I think he's quite calm in the corner. I don't think he tries to overload. You see some guys, you know, Ben Davison, you know, he gets a lot of stick. Ben Davison, for me, just talks and talks and talks and talks, and it's sometimes too much. I thought Joe McNally was to the point. Thought his instruction was nice and clear, and he always seems quite calm in the corner. You know, he never really gets too carried away. I thought he conducted himself quite well for somebody who is still at that level. You know, he's relatively new to kind of headline events and these big shows. I don't know what your thoughts are. Obviously, we've started to see him a little bit more often. Don't know your view.
Man, it was a shock to me when I saw Josh Taylor go there, but maybe that's just because I'm on the other side of the pond. You know, I'm over here, so obviously we only hear about the bigger names unless you're a boxing nerd like us, and we have to, you know, we go searching for it. So it was that was a surprise. But after seeing what he was saying in the corner and then rushing across the ring and kind of like grabbing Chris Eubank Jr. because, you know, he was out of sorts and still kind of throwing punches. You know, yeah, that really, you know, sold it to me. I was like, okay, like he's, you know, seems like a good guy, he talks well, and, you know, he was in there with the best interests of, you know, Eubank and kind of grabbed him so he didn't do anything silly. But I thought he looked good last night.
Eubank was obviously being trained by Roy Jones Jr., the great Roy Jones Jr. Craig, what's your take on, because obviously and I guess this applies to a lot of high prominent athletes when they retire from a sport, because we've never seen a consistent pattern of success for these high performance athletes who were good as individual, you know, fighters, players, athletes, what have you, in their respective sports, but when they translate as a coach, those skills don't translate to their coaching. What do you think about somebody like Roy Jones Jr., who was such a great talent, being a head coach and, you know, being in the corner of Chris Eubank Jr. this past Saturday night?
So I think it's really interesting because obviously you see this happen in football, soccer over here. You probably see it, you know, over your side of the water as well. These guys end up in positions of management or positions of, you know, coaches and trainers based on their own achievements as individuals, and I think it's really hard. You know, the Roy Jones Jr. example is a great example. Roy Jones Jr. was a freakish talent when he was a boxer. You know, there's some people that will say he's one of the best that's ever lived. He'll be a lot of people's favourite fighter they've ever watched. Now, you can have all the best ideas, you can have all of those experiences yourself, from winning world titles, moving up and down divisions, topping the pay-per-view scales or the pound-for-pound rankings. You can have all of that. Coaching that into somebody else who isn't you and doesn't have your skill set or your attributes, you could be teaching Chris Eubank Jr. Everything you teach him could be gold. But he's not you. He's not Roy Jones Jr. And, we've seen it before. Ricky Hatton's coaching career has been very up and down and probably insignificant, truth be told. But he's not teaching guys that are Ricky Hatton. He's not teaching people who have the same mass appeal or the same capacity to go that extra 30% in training. It's the same in football. Michael, Frank Lampard over here at the moment, soccer coach, was a great soccer player, and he's absolutely dying a death at Everton Football Club. They're bottom of the league. The fans are, but he's not coaching a team of Frank Lampard's. He's coaching guys that have been cobbled together who have a limited skill set. So for me, I think we've seen it time and time again, and it transitions from sport to sport. These guys that were elite performers, more often than not, are not elite trainers or are not elite coaches, because the lessons that they learned and the things that worked for them because they were at such a high level. They were so elite. And to train somebody or to work with somebody who's even 15%, 20% short of what you were when you were at your best, the lessons don't land the same. The punches don't flow the same as they did for Roy Jones Jr. That hands-down style isn't the same, because Chris Eubank, as decent as he may be, he's never going to be Roy Jones Jr. Not now, not 10 years ago. 10 years ago, excuse me. It doesn't really work for me. And then you look at guys, revered trainers. Over here we have Shane McGuigan, who always gets a lot of praise. Shane McGuigan had a kind of decent short run as an amateur, but he was never a pro boxer. He never really achieved anything as a pro or anything too significant as an amateur, but he gets the training element. He understands it, and his approach changes depending on who he's training. He's worked with big guys, he's worked with small guys. He understands how it works. And I think that's the thing. Guys like Shane McGuigan will train a stable of 5 fighters to be the best they can be, focusing on their strengths and their skill sets. Roy Jones Jr. might train 2 or 3 people to try and be the next Roy Jones Jr. And that's not possible, in my opinion. So it's a tricky one.
In terms of this fight, we saw some reported information that there possibly could be a rematch clause. How realistic is it that we see a rematch between these two fighters, Craig?
You would have to imagine it's likely, because Eubank Jr. seems like somebody who has immense pride. He seems like he's a very confident, comfortable in his own skin type of character. Losing like that, people saying his punch resistance may be gone or it may have taken a bit of a dip. He won't see it that way. He'll see it as luck. And, I've seen him come out today with comments saying that he was caught with a lucky shot. Fighters are the best liars in the world. They tell themselves these stories and, next time it'll be different. It was a lucky shot. It was this, it was that. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a rematch. And I've got to say, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a rematch go a completely different way. I could see Eubank fighting Smith, and I could see Eubank beating Liam Smith. It's one of those. When we looked at Usyk fighting Joshua, you looked at the rematch, and I don't think a lot of people would see the rematch going differently to how it went. The second fight was very similar to the first. Joshua might have looked a little bit better, but it played out pretty much exactly the same. I could see Eubank-Smith playing out differently. I could see Eubank catching him with a quick flurry. I could see Smith struggling with the speed of Eubank, and maybe it is a stroke of luck, but I think we'll definitely see a rematch. I don't think Eubank's pride will let him go another route. I don't know, Michael. I know you said you fancied Smith anyway, but do you reckon it could go a different way, or do you think that's it for Eubank and Smith's got his number?
I think it just depends with Eubank, because I think he's the sort that was always going to resort to like his natural style, just kind of like pressurizing, throwing a lot of combinations. And I just don't know whether that is going to work against Smith, especially with him being so stubborn. I don't know whether he would go out with the wrong game plan against Smith, and maybe try to like go in there and take him out. And he's not really like a real one punch hitter quitter, is he? It's more combinations that he kind of like wears you down with. But I agree with you that I think that like if he listened to his corner, listened to Roy Jones, and he came up with a good game plan against Smith, Smith is hittable. He normally takes one to land, to land one or two when you watch him. So, yeah, I could see it if he went out with the right game plan and then came back, did something different. I could see it going the other way because, I thought Smith had a good chance of winning, but I thought it was going to be on points. I didn't think he would take him out in the fourth round. I thought it could be maybe a late stoppage because we have, Smith does seem to start slowly, winds into it. Something like an 8th, 9th, 10th round. I didn't see him knocking him out clean as that in the fourth round.
Yeah.
Craig, where do we see, or actually, let me ask you this. Does this increase or decrease the interest in a Eubank-Conor Benn fight?
That's a really good question, mate. I think it maybe makes that fight more valid than people who weren't fans of it thought originally. I think a lot of people thought that fight was very unfair in terms of the weight, in terms of the disparity between both guys and the experience they've had in their professional careers. I think that vulnerability that was exhibited by Eubank last night probably gives Conor Benn a much higher chance of emerging successful. I don't know. I guess it also damages his star power a little bit, Eubank. It takes a little bit of shine off his name, which in turn would take a bit of shine off a victory for Conor Benn. I think it's obvious that Benn wants that fight. He's been on his Instagram mocking Eubank, posting clips and memes and whatever else, as though he's not got his own stuff happening in the background. I think the strength of both of the names alone means that fight still draws a lot of interest from people. I think in terms of the significance for whoever wins it moving on and whoever loses it, falling back, maybe that becomes less significant because both guys are sort of in this middle ground now. It might be a better time for the guys to meet now because Eubank suffered that loss. Benn's coming back from this drug ban whenever he does. If he gets a ban, it's another story. It might make more sense now for them to meet, and then whatever happens, they can move on and follow their respective paths from there.
I think it kind of dips initially, but then the fight gets announced, and then if I was Eubank, I'd be like, well, Conor, you had to take PEDs to try to beat me. That's how scared you were, right? And then it builds back up. The same as we all said, I'm not going to buy Kell Brook Amir Khan. That's like 5 years too late. And then fight week starts and we're all like, oh, fuck yeah, I'm buying it on Saturday. Exactly the same thing. Like we're all like, oh, Eubank's done. He's got no chin. I'm not buying that. It's a waste of $20. And then fight week comes. We all buy in. We always fall for the same thing. And then they announce the pay-per-view and it does really well.
Maybe that says more about us than it does about them.
No, that's true. That's true. And then Craig, where does Liam Smith? Let's just assume that the rematch isn't next. Maybe Eubank goes the Conor Benn route, or wants a fight in between to kind of get his mentality back up. Who would a realistic opponent for Liam Smith be next? Maybe a good matchup.
I think that's an interesting question as well. Does he stay at 160? You might. I don't know. He looked very comfortable at 160 in that fight. Does he want to try and push on for a fight with a Golovkin or somebody like that? I think it's risky. I think it's risky at this stage of his career. He's probably got a couple of big fights left. You could catch Golovkin at the perfect time, and you could run away with a win over a legend like that who's 40 years old now. I think when you look at rankings and stuff like that, there's a lot of decent fights floating in and around. Does he fight a guy like Murata, who Golovkin just beat, just to get a kind of world level name on his resume at 160? But there's a lot of decent guys. There's a lot of decent guys kicking about there. Munguia still floating about. Does he fancy another crack at a guy like Munguia, who seemingly cannot get a fight? Any fight worthwhile for love nor money. His career has just been really bizarre. He's been kind of managed into a corner, I think. So Golovkin's the obvious name that I think anybody would be calling out at 160 at the moment. If he goes back down to 154, which I don't know how probable that is at 34. I think down there it's a nightmare. If he's looking for world titles, you've got guys like Charlo, you've got guys like Tsu's there. You've got guys like Madrimovs and people like that coming up. It's tough. A Josh Kelly fight, I think a Josh Kelly fight could be interesting. If he makes 154, that's a big fight in the UK. Kelly coming off that big win over Williamson, Troy Williamson, when he looked fantastic. But I think 154 is a tougher division to make a mark at world level. And I think he'd probably want to try and stay away from that if he could. 160 seems like the place to be at the moment. A lot of these guys are a little bit older. They're getting on. Is it time for Liam Smith to try and leapfrog one of those guys and grab a world title?
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Moving on to the co-main event of this event, Richard Riakporhe remains undefeated at 16-0 with the 4th round TK over Krzysztof Glowacki. I think I said that right, maybe not. Who takes the 4th professional loss of his career. Craig, what'd you think about Richard Riakporhe's TKO?
It went exactly as I thought it would, Danny, to be honest. I put a bit of money on rounds 4 to 6. Glowacki's obviously operated at a decent level. He lost his world title to Usyk, and before that, he was having good fights with guys like, I think he fought Bradis, where Bradis hit him with that elbow, that kind of MMA maneuver which went unseen by the referee. Riakporhe's big and strong, and I think one thing Riakporhe's getting better at is picking his punches. He seems to be waiting for openings now, whereas before he was all about pouring on that pressure and trying to land big shots wherever he could. Fighting Glowacki took a couple of rounds, and the last 30, 60 seconds of the second and the third rounds, he was landing nice, clean, big shots. He was waiting for Glowacki to open up, get a little bit careless, and he was landing those massive right hands. He's got a lot of power. You look at his physique, he's a massive cruiserweight, big, muscle-bound guy. It pretty much went exactly as I thought it would, mate, to be honest, and it'll be interesting to see. I think the cruiserweight division over here, there's a lot of guys that are knocking on the door of world titles. Riakporhe's certainly one of them. Chris Billam-Smith is another one. Obviously, they brought Chris into the ring after the fight, and they were kind of hinting at a rematch between those two. Close fight the first time those two guys fought as well. But the Glowacki fight served its purpose. It's a big win over a guy that's been competing at the top level for the last 5 to 10 years. So he looked good. I thought he looked good. He looked composed.
Mike, what'd you think about Riakporhe's win?
Yeah, I think Chris nailed it, really. I thought it was going to go that way. I thought Glowacki was a well-picked bit of matchmaking. I think we said last week, if you looked at it, Glowacki's pro debut was like 15 years ago. So that just kind of shows how many miles he's got on the clock. But he still has that name recognition, so it's a good pick for Richard Riakporhe, who really has just gone from strength to strength after, being in the wilderness for a little while. And I think, Boxer, and Sky have someone, really, really good. They can put some strength behind, going forward. And I think he's probably ready to step up to some bigger names in that division.
And then moving on that card, I forgot how I said this last week. Is it Echo
Esselman?
Echo Esselman also remains undefeated at 19-0 with a majority decision win over Chris Kongo, who takes the 2nd professional loss of his career. Craig, what'd you think about this victory?
I think this fight probably went the way a lot of people would have predicted. Kongo a lot taller, a lot longer, and he started the fight really well. First few rounds, he looked pretty good. He was picking his shots nicely. But Echo Esselman, the guy's nickname is the Engine. And the commentators, every commentator on the broadcast was saying, listen, give it a few rounds because he's going to pour it on. And that's exactly what happened. Kongo, I've known Chris Kongo for a long time, and he was a good amateur. When he lost to Michael Mickinson, people were saying, well, I don't really know where he goes from there. When he takes a different route, he beats Formella, gathers a little bit of steam again. But this was always going to be a tough fight. Esselman's just one of those guys. He doesn't hit the hardest. He's not the best technically, but he's good enough, fit enough to wear people like Chris Kongo down. And that's the thing. I think when you saw from rounds 9 to rounds 12, it looked as though he could probably have stopped Kongo as well. But yeah, it was tricky fight.
Craig, what did you think? Because obviously every time a Ben Davison fighter loses, everyone jumps on Twitter and gives him both barrels. So what's your opinion of, Ben Davison?
It's a hard one. It's a hard one. I think Davison's almost a victim of, and I can't even say his own success. Davison is a victim of being the guy people chose to move to when certain things happen. And what I mean by that is he rose to prominence when he helped Tyson Fury get his act together. Then Billy Joe Saunders chose to work with him. He'd worked with him once previously. He chose to work with him again. And then straight away you have two of the loudest, most naturally talented reigning world champions in the UK are working with this guy that nobody really knows and no one's really sure how he's got to this position. Then he just starts to inherit fighters, from all over the place. He inherits Josh Taylor when Taylor has that split from Shane McGuigan. Then he inherits, it's stable now when you look at it. He's got the McCormick brothers coming out of the Olympics. He's that guy that people turn to. And what I would say is he's obviously had mixed success. The stuff he's done with Lee Wood can't be overlooked. And I think that's one thing we have to pay attention to. Lee Wood was a guy that got beat on points by Jazza Dickens, a few years ago. Now he's stopping Zucan, he's stopping Mick Conlon in these great fights, and he's a legitimate world-level fighter now. So Ben Davison's had a massive impact in Wood's career. What I think people see is they see this weird persona that Davison has where, he almost talks in riddles and he's almost like a boxing trainer's version of David Brent from The Office, where he almost wants to sound like the smartest guy in the room. And you look through his Instagram feeds, everything's like a fucking quote you would see on like a Drake picture or something. Do you know what I mean? It's always like these weird. I think that's the thing that probably puts people off. There's no doubt. I think he knows his boxing. I think he studies boxing and he invests a lot of time in his work. I think for me, you'd like to see him take some guys like the McCormicks, who again, obviously they've got natural talent, they're Olympians. If he takes them the whole way through, you start to go, all right, okay, cool. He's helped that guy progress. The stuff he's done with Wood counts for a lot, but there are arguments that other people have got worse working with him. And I think Taylor's a prime example. I think McGuigan and Taylor were a match made in heaven. For one reason or another, they split. We won't go into that, but the performances with Davison, I wasn't massively impressed, to be honest. The undisputed fight with Jose Ramirez, obviously Taylor won. He left with all the belts. I thought, the way they paced that fight was strange. He started well and then seemed to take his foot off the gas. And Davison seemed quite comfortable with that in the corner. He seemed to be kind of reading the scoring of that fight wrong. For me, Taylor against Catterall, that was one of the strangest performances I've seen, because he never changed his game plan throughout, and he was getting outboxed every round. There was nothing to suggest that Davison wanted him to change anything, and it just wasn't working. So,
do you think it's the fact that he's kind of started at the top of the game? He's still learning on the job, and he's not had those fights outside of live audiences where he can cut his teeth at the bottom and kind of work up under the radar.
Yeah, I think that plays a part in it. I think the sad thing about boxing, and we all know this from speaking to people who've been involved in it for years, you can have two or three guys that are starting at the top, and you'll have 100 guys who are cutting their teeth. And of those 100 guys at the bottom, 99 of them will make no fucking money, and they'll disappear because they don't get the right chances or the right opportunities. So a guy like Ben Davison, he's always, if he gets the chance to work with a Tyson Fury or a Billy Joe Saunders straight off the bat, you'd take it, right? And if you ask those guys at the bottom, they would take it as well. It's just that he was the guy. Those fighters fell into his lap, through connections to certain companies or whatever. And I think it's just one of those weird things. But I think you're right. You're spot on in what you say. He's suffered from that, because as soon as those guys start performing below their expected standard, the only thing that's changed is the guy in the corner. Now, it could be that Josh Taylor's maybe slightly past his best, but if the only thing that's changed is his trainer and his performances start to dip, you turn your head and you look at his trainer and you say, well, it must be something to do with him. It's a weird one, and it's almost, we spoke about team sports coaches as well. They go through a bad run of form. Everybody points to the manager. Some of the players will just not be performing, or they're not turning up in training, or you turn and you look at the manager because the team overall are playing poorly. I think it's one of those things. They're a reflection of what's going on, and they often take the blame.
Rounding off that card, Craig, heavyweight matchup. Joseph Parker gets the 10-round unanimous decision win over Jack Massey, who takes the second loss of his career. What do you think about Parker's win, Craig, and where does he go from here?
Danny, it bored me to tears, mate, that fight. It bored me to tears. I think I put this on my Twitter. You could have just played me round 1 10 times in a row, and I would have thought it was the same. Like, it was the same. The pattern of the fight, it didn't really change. Parker just throwing, single shots for the majority. He's trying to work his way forward and throw a big left hook, or maybe a couple of big body shots. But his volume, his output wasn't enough for me. Fighting a guy like Massey, who even at cruiserweight is yet to test himself at world level. It just seemed like a strange matchup. As soon as it was announced, I thought, this is really bizarre. The performance was a bit lethargic. And I think it's an interesting one because we spoke about trainers who were good fighters themselves, and then maybe it's not really working out for them as you'd think as trainers. I think Andy Lee, I've got a lot of time for Andy Lee. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he's a great guy and a great talker. I don't see why Joe Parker is living away from his family in fucking Morecambe Bay, which is not a glamorous place, Danny. I don't know if you've been there, I doubt it. But to work in that camp and to be producing the results he's producing, I think, for me, he's going backwards. And that fight, he won the fight comfortably. Massey was never really there to win the fight. Massey didn't really look as though he was there to win the fight, which was maybe a bit disappointing, but you see the reaction and you see the social media posts from Massey's camp. They're celebrating the fact he went the distance, which for me tells you they were there to survive in the first place. I don't know how long Parker's got left, mate. Somebody put on Twitter, where does Parker sit at the table with these guys at the top of the heavyweight division? I said he doesn't sit at the table. He's outside and he's looking through the window watching these guys now, because even these young guys coming up, your Jared Andersons, these guys would probably beat Parker at this point.
Craig, do you think, we were talking last week and I kind of tore into Joseph Parker a bit with Callum from Below the Belt. Do you think Parker is massively overrated? And if you were Parker, would you go back to being an international methamphetamine drug dealer?
He's definitely got the look, doesn't he? He's got the look. He'd definitely do it. He's got that menacing look. I like it. I think he benefited. He squeaked past Hughie Fury, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
When he won his WBO title, he squeaked past Hughie Fury. Andy Ruiz went to New Zealand and beat him. His career is a really weird career when you think of the opportunities and the paydays that he's given. Boxer were bending over backwards to try and sign him. You're thinking, why is that? Is that to try and lure in some other big heavyweights because you've got this guy who's got a ranking maybe? Did they truly believe that Joe Parker was a guy that was going to make a surge towards titles? I think he's one of those guys who moved into the professional game and found himself at the top of the heavyweight division at a young age. And that always gets promoters, managers excited, because everybody knows heavyweights peak when they're, maybe mid-30s. Their shelf life is a lot longer than a guy that's fighting at 140, 147. So when Parker's up there taking, big, meaningful fights and winning titles when he's 26, 27, people think, well, he could improve. He's got a lot of time left. He's got 8-9 years at the top of the sport. It's not really worked out that way. I've not been impressed with the Joe Parker performance for years now. His performance against Joshua was dull and boring and should have been the biggest night of his life. Even if he left it all on the line and lost that night, he could look back proudly and say, I had a go. He never really had a go. And since then, he's been in some big, tough fights that have swung back and forward. He's not been great and he's not improved for me.
Yeah.
Craig, who's his best victory on his resume as of today?
I mean, that's a great question as well. That's a great question. You look at the guys that have beat him. I mean, Dillian White's beat him. Joshua's beat him. Joe Parker obviously battered him. I don't know. I don't know who it is. I mean, is it a Hughie Fury? It sounds mad to say it should be a Hughie Fury or a Chisora or somebody like that, but he's just not really got any big wins. You know, Junior Fa. He's never going to be a Junior Fa. But it's mad. It's mad that he's not had any more meaningful victories. It's probably a Hughie Fury or a Chisora, to be honest.
Yeah.
Literally lives off being a ex-world champion that made some super funny videos during COVID.
Oh yeah, listen, great guy. Sounds like a really cool guy, but yeah, that WBO title has made him a multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
Well, he already was.
Allegedly.
A legitimate millionaire.
Allegedly. All right, moving on to fight previews this upcoming Saturday, the 28th of January, from the Wembley Arena in London on BT Sports for the IBF, WBC, and WBO light heavyweight world titles. Artur Beterbiev, 18-0, goes up against Anthony Yarde, 23-2. All right, Craig, break down this fight for us. What do you think?
I think it's going to take a brave person to confidently pick Anthony Yarde to beat Beterbiev. Beterbiev's an absolute machine. He's as close to a cyborg as you'll get, I think, in professional boxing. 100% stoppage ratio. I think the only time he's properly been in any sort of trouble was Callum Johnson put him down, and then was brutally stopped a couple of rounds later. Yarde for me is a really funny one. You consider the age that Yarde is as well. I think, he fought Kovalev, and he's a guy who has lived off one impressive round against Sergey Kovalev, who was way past his best as well. And yeah, he had an impressive round, and then he was stopped by a jab, a round or two later. So Yarde's obviously, he's quite slick. He's very muscle bound and heavy handed. He's got quite, his hands are quite fast. I just think Beterbiev is far too good. I think he can take a shot. I think his amateur pedigree before he turned professional was top level. Yarde's was nowhere near middling level. I think he had 12 amateur fights, something crazy like that. It's fights like this where you can start to really tell the difference. And the only question mark probably is around Beterbiev's age. I see earlier on this week he turned 38. Somebody will come close to catching him at the right time, where he's that little bit too old. I just don't think it will be Yarde. I think Yarde will get caught. I think Beterbiev is clever enough to avoid those Mayweather-esque combinations and flurries that Yarde tries to throw out. And I think he'll stop Yarde. Probably second half of the fight, I would say. And I think the best Yarde can hope for is that he emerges with some sort of credibility from having a good go, from maybe putting Beterbiev in a little bit of trouble, trapping him in the ropes for a couple of rounds to make it exciting. I would not be the guy confidently saying Yarde's going to beat Artur Beterbiev. If you two are, then I take my hat off to you.
Craig, are you looking forward to the fight, or are you looking forward to the Tunde Ajayi fight week more?
We spoke about Drake pictures with quotes. I don't know what Tunde Ajayi would be. Someone slightly less stable than Drake. He's a madman, isn't he? He's a maverick. He's just...
Kanye West. I would say he's more...
That's exactly it. Yeah, Kanye West. You just don't know whether you're coming or going, do you? With him, he's off the wall. He's an off the wall character. But what you have to say is extremely loyal. He's got so much faith in Yarde's ability to win. His corner work infuriates and cracks me up at the same time. It's funny listening to some of the stuff he comes out with. all that lines in the camp shit, all that stupid stuff. And he loves a catchphrase, doesn't he? And again, this is like, you get your guys who give kind of succinct, sharp, nice, clear instructions, and then you get trainers that come out with catchphrases to try and get their fighter excited, and he's very much in the latter. But yeah, we'll see what he comes out with. Tunde Ajayi, he's a bit of a madman, but he's a character, right? So probably gets people a little bit annoyed and a little bit excited at the same time. So we'll see what he's got to offer this week.
Moving on that card in the co-main event, Artem Salakian. I think I hopefully said that right. 21-0, undefeated. A lot of undefeated records so far during this episode. Goes up against David Jimenez for the WBA flyweight world title. What do you think about this fight, Craig?
I don't know much about Jimenez, to be honest with you, Danny. I've seen Dalakian a few times. I think Dalakian was a top class amateur that was thrown into big fights quite early, if I'm not mistaken. Sounds like it should be competitive, but if you guys know more than me, then I'll pass over to you. I'm not sure about Jimenez.
What do you think about this fight, Mike? WBA flyweight world title.
Well, we were there. We saw Jimenez beat Ricardo Sandoval. Danny, if you remember on the Golden Boy card, kind of came out of nowhere. It looked like it was supposed to be a tick-over fight, essentially, for, the heavy-handed Ricardo Sandoval, who was, our UK listeners will probably remember, he was the mandatory for Sonny Edwards. But for some reason, they decided to pass it up and go a different route. He sprung the surprise against Sandoval, who looked at kind of like at odds that night, didn't he? He just kind of couldn't put up with the work rate, and then eventually got beaten down, got dropped late on, and then he lost on a majority decision. So it should be a good fight. I think Dalakian will win. Dalakian hasn't fought for, I think, like 2 years. He's definitely got the more pedigree, definitely got the better amateur career. And I think Dalakian will probably come out victorious on the night, and then hopefully we'd like to see, probably not the name we want for Sonny Edwards, but it would pick up another belt, for him. But I think all of us probably want Sonny to, go in like Julio Cesar Martinez or somebody like that later down the line. And, I think that would be, a great fight for that division as well. Sonny Edwards Martinez, and then Sonny hopefully can pick up, all of the belts in and around that division, and then maybe move up and get some bigger names, because the good thing about those divisions, I guess, is that they all kind of tend to have to fight each other for the world titles because of the lack of, the big money in those divisions.
Craig, who's the best flyweight in the world right now?
You probably have to edge towards it, Sonny Edwards, I think. Sonny Edwards is very talented. I guess the one thing about Sonny that remains to be seen is, how does he react when he takes a shot? And no one's really been able to catch him clean. I think you probably have to say Sonny. Julio Cesar Martinez, as aggressive as he is and as much success as he's had, you see him fight Chocolatito, and he was made to look very average. So I think he's definitely limited. I think you probably have to say Sonny at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. And also on this card is the highly anticipated debut, at least for hardcore boxing fans, of the highly rated heavyweight Moses Atauma. Is that how you say it? As of this recording, there's no opponent listed for him, unless we're wrong. But I think the biggest thing is just the debut of this highly touted heavyweight. What's your take on this new heavyweight to enter the boxing game in the professional ranks, Craig?
Superstar. He'll be an absolute superstar, I think. I started hearing about Enrico Moses Atauma. I think he kind of changes between Enrico and Moses. I started hearing about him probably 6 to 9 months ago, and I was hearing stories about him, when he was 15, 16 years old. The stories are, public now, coming in and sparring guys like Lawrence Okoli, and winning rounds in those spars when Okoli was a world champion and the guy's 15, 16 yeah, and then you watch them in those amateur tournaments, and he's just got it. He moves like a welterweight or a lightweight. He's so slick. He's got power. He picks his shots wonderfully. I think to win the junior European amateur championships, he knocked everybody out on the weight. He might have knocked them all out in the first round. And amateur boxing, when you get up to heavyweight, of course, the percentage of knockouts increases, but to do that in every fight is impressive. And then he won the AIBA Youth World Championships at the back end of last year. Knocked a few of his opponents out. I'm pretty sure he knocked the Ukrainian boy out in the final as well. Boxing is such a weird sport because there's so many different things that can happen between being a highly touted amateur and reaching the pinnacle of the professional sport. There's so many things that can throw you off course. Management, promotional issues, injuries, temptation outside of the ring, all of these kind of things, suffering a loss that you weren't supposed to. All these things can throw you off course and take you away from what everybody perceives will be your destiny. But from everything I've heard from multiple different gyms and multiple people involved in boxing over here, the guy is a superstar in waiting, I think.
And he was undefeated during his amateur career, right?
Yeah, I don't think he's been beaten. Yeah, I think he's won every fight. Which again, he's obviously young, right? So he's not had hundreds and hundreds of amateur fights, but yeah.
I know Craig, he said in some of the interviews that his aim is to try to become the youngest, world champion, beating the record currently held by Mike Tyson. What chance do you give that? Because I think you touched on it earlier. Most heavyweights kind of become, in their prime, a lot later in their career. If you look at Joe Joyce, obviously Fraser Clark, they both didn't turn professional till like early 30s.
I think it's tough, right? Because boxing now is as much political as it is talent-based in terms of who wins titles, and promoters, you see it probably more so with the Al Heyman and the Showtime guys. They like to keep their world titles in-house, and they'll rotate challengers, and they'll make sure that it doesn't leave their broadcaster if they can help it. I think the interesting thing is, Usyk effectively holds the majority of the titles at the moment. If Tyson Fury and Usyk fight and Fury emerges victorious, then all of those world titles are in Frank Warren's house. And Warren obviously has Joe Joyce, he has Daniel Dubois, he'll have Moses Itauma, you'll have these guys to start moving them towards titles. If Usyk wins that fight, which I don't think is a foregone conclusion, then you have to wonder how easy it becomes to split those titles up. When does Usyk retire? He won't fight forever. And in that scramble, how likely is a guy like Itauma going to be in the next 18 months to 2 years to be in a mandatory position or to be selected to fight for a vacant title? There'll be guys queuing up. There are already people queuing up now because of the state of the world titles at heavyweight. For shots that they believe they are owed. I think the only question mark for me is Frank Warren and Queensberry are notoriously quite careful in terms of plotting people's next moves and next steps. I don't know if Frank is likely to throw a Talma into big fights early, and maybe he builds him up nice and slowly because he's got time on his side. For me, you want to see a guy like that just go for it. We've seen Joe Joyce. He was a bit older. His professional debut was over 10 rounds against Ian Lewison, who was a solid heavyweight. And he's kind of went on from there and just taken serious fight after serious fight. So it depends. I think he's got the talent. I think it's a tough one when they're that age and that talented, because you want to move them on quickly. You don't want to treat the public and the fans as though they're idiots, because you don't want them out fighting 4-rounders, 6-rounders against Fraser Clark's opponents, getting recycled. But you don't want to throw them in too early, and as I said earlier on, throw them off course, and you waste the next 2 or 3 years trying to rebuild a guy up.
You talked about, Craig, things that can go wrong, when you're trying to build a fighter up. Pardon me. If he has lions in his camp, how many is too many lions so his career goes wrong?
I would say no more than 3 lions, Michael. I'm sure you'll agree. That seems like the appropriate amount.
Appropriate amount of lions. There you go, everybody listening. We've all been wondering, and it's 3.
It's 3. There's your answer. Moving on. from the YouTube Theater in Inglewood, California, just outside of Los Angeles. It's Los Angeles County still in Southern California. On DAZN, the first fight at this venue that opened not too long ago here in Los Angeles. A welterweight matchup for the WBO, NABO welterweight title. Alexis Rocha, 21-1, goes up against Anthony Young, 24-2. This is a Golden Boy Promotions event. Greg, what's your take on Alexis Rocha right now, as within the welterweight division and as a fighter as a whole, and the stable that Golden Boy has right now at 147 pounds?
I really like Rocha. I think I wrote a feature with him before he fought Brad Solomon, probably a couple of years ago. He won that fight on points, and there was a lot of people talking about him. I think he'd been brought over to spar Josh Taylor down south in the UK, so he was willing to travel for good sparring. I think he's obviously very, very talented. Suffered a loss to Rashidi Ellis, which there's no shame in that. Obviously, Rashidi lost last week or the week before, but he's long been thought of as a top contender at that weight. Good to see Rocha bounce back, and he's taken fights that have allowed him to show that he's learnt from that loss. It would have been easy to take fights and ease himself back in, but he's fighting guys like Veron. He fought Blair Cobbs and stopped Cobbs late in that fight. I think Rocha's got a lot of ability. Still young, 25. He's got plenty of time. And I think when you look at that division, it's another one of those divisions where it's going to be extremely tough to get your hands on a world title at 147 at the moment. You've got your Spences and your Crawfords. You've got your next generation, your Boots Ennises and your Virgil Ortiz. You've got guys like Styonnis kicking about. It's going to be hard to claim a portion of the world title, I think, at that weight, but I think he's definitely got the ability to do so. It's going to take some careful matchmaking, and again, it could be one of these where they wait for a vacant title, or they kind of work their way up through a mandatory route to get a hold of one. But at the moment, the next few years, I don't think you'll see him win a world title in the next few years. I think it'll be all about timing, and if they can capitalise on somebody moving up or vacating or something like that.
Craig, do you think Errol Spence will stay at 154? It looks like he's maybe testing the waters, or maybe it's just a throwaway fight at 154 against Thurman.
I think you could probably see him moving up. I think he's served his time at 147, 100%. We look at, when he fought Kell Brook, how long ago was that? He fought Kell Brook, and he's been defending that title, and he's been fighting, some of the best as well. 154 seems pretty logical. He's probably at that age in his career where that extra 7 pounds will make all the difference. And I guess that opens up doors as well for people. So it'll be interesting to see where the chips lie after the titles are vacated. And, what does Crawford do? Does Crawford chase him up to 154? Or does Crawford hang about and try and become undisputed? It's an interesting one. You'd have to think guys like Boots Ennis is probably lined up for an IBF whenever that becomes available. Virgil Ortiz in that Golden Boy stable as well. Do they make fights in-house, amongst Oscar's stable? It'll be interesting to see how they manage that situation as well. There's a lot of good fighters and a lot of good young fighters coming through there, so it's not just the guys clinging on to titles, which is good to see.
Craig, you mentioned obviously the difficulties for somebody like Alexis Rocha, which Virgil Ortiz is currently in at the moment, being out from the outside looking in the welterweight division, being able to get a shot at one of the big titles and all that. How possible do you think it is that Golden Boy's hand is forced to just match up Rocha and Ortiz at that weight class?
I think it probably gets to a stage where it's risk versus reward, isn't it? It's that old cliche, and I guess Golden Boy have to ask themselves, if they don't put two of their own guys against each other for a significant title, then they open up the possibility of somebody from an alternative promotion being able to come in and beat one of their fighters. And then where do you land? You leave with no piece of the pie. I think it's probably likely, if as Michael said, an Errol Spence and a Terence Crawford move up and those titles are split, it probably gets to a stage where they have to consider doing something like that. sometimes I think that's the smart thing to do. If you can keep that title in house and control where it goes, I'm not for that as a general behaviour in boxing. Keeping the title and just passing it back and forth between your own guys. I think it's quite restrictive and it's unfair. But from a business standpoint, I think it could end up making sense to do it that way.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I think that's probably likely in the future. Moving on that card, Beck the Bully, 10-1, goes up against Ulysses Sierra for the WBA Continental America's super middleweight title. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, is this Beck the Bully's first fight since suffering that loss to Rosado?
I thought it was no, he's fought a few times, I think.
Has he? Has he fought a few times already?
Yeah,
I don't know why I felt that was the last one, maybe.
I think he fought back home. He had a fight. He had a fight back in Uzbekistan, maybe. I might be getting the country wrong. Apologies. Yeah. And then I think he won twice in the US. I think last year they weren't high profile. They were pretty run of the mill fights, but he's definitely been out a few times, I think.
Yeah, he's had 3, like Craig said, since then.
So there's been a couple. Yeah,
lesser.
So Beck the Bully, Craig, where now obviously that makes it a little bit better in terms of momentum for him that he's had a couple fights and a couple wins consecutively since that knockout loss to Gabe Rosado. What do you think about Beck the Bully in this fight? And is that loss that he took from Rosado, was that just maybe like a fluke loss that people, boxing fans should overlook because he's still talented enough to proceed forward to success?
I think this fight will be over in 3 rounds. I don't think Ulysses Sierra offers much in terms of resistance. I know Berlanga stopped him in 1. Berlanga was making a habit of doing that until recently, but he put him away in the first round, and the 2 wins that he's had since then, I don't know about the guy he fought in his last bout, but the fight after the Berlanga fight, I think the boy had about 80 losses or something like that, and a handful of wins. So Ulysses Sierra is not the kind of guy that's going to offer enough resistance to Milikuziev. But I think Beck the Bully is obviously talented. For me, the Rosado, as opposed to being a fluke, I think it was almost a blueprint, and it almost showed fighters of a certain level how to beat Milikuziev, and I think he's too raw and he's too reckless. You see him in there, and he fights as though he's in a car park of a bar. Do you know what I mean? He's throwing wild shots. He's so aggressive, and listen, as fans watching that, it's great, and it's great when you're in there blowing guys away who can't stand up to that pressure. But when you move through the ranks, you have to have a little bit more composure. I think Rosado stuck it out. I think did he put Rosado down early? Rosado is one of those guys. He's seasoned, and he's a very good boxer despite having a fair few losses. He just picked his shots a little bit better as they started moving through the rounds, and Milikuziev just left himself open, throwing crazy big shots, and he got caught on the way in. Beautiful, beautiful shot, perfectly timed, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happen again as Milikuziev starts to fight guys that are in the top 10, unless he changes something dramatically. But he's raw, he's reckless, he's aggressive, he's 100 miles an hour, very, very fan-friendly. I think he leaves himself open to suffer a similar defeat in the next few years.
But it was a super middleweight match, about 168 pounds. Golden Boy I know he fights at middleweight, but they do have Jaime Munguia, who is also in a similar boat as Alexis Rocha and having difficulty getting the big fights with the respective fighters in those divisions. Let me ask this question, Craig. For Munguia, do you think that Golden Boy would either match up Munguia with Beck the Bully, either maybe 168 or 160 or maybe a catch weight, or match Munguia with somebody like Gennady Golovkin at 160 or 168 pounds?
I'm not entirely convinced Munguia wants to be a boxer anymore, to be honest. The guy's been floating about geez, it must be 7, 8 years he's been at that level. And it just seems bizarre to me that they can't make significant fights for him. It's, when he burst onto the scene, he was early 20s. He was winning. I think he won. Did he win a world title? Or he was fighting for like a version of a world title, I think. It just can't be that hard to make significant fights year after year. There's something there that's stopping them from doing that. The Golovkin chat has been repeated again over the last couple of years. It kind of reminds me of Eubank when he used to mention Golovkin's name every 6 months and nothing would happen, and you just kind of got fed up listening to it. I can't see him. Maybe they feed Golovkin to Munguia now that they think Golovkin's past his best. He's in his 40s. Maybe that's something they eventually get done. I wouldn't be surprised if this year we don't see him fight anybody significant again. I think, to your question, generally speaking, Milikuziev to me doesn't look naturally like a big super middleweight. He's quite short, I think, in stature compared to some of these guys that campaign at 168. So could he come down a little bit? Maybe. They should put Munguia in with a guy like Berlanga. Stick him in with a guy like Berlanga, who's now a free agent. There's question marks over him. He had that run knocking people out. Now he's not a feared guy anymore, the same as he was 18 months ago. Stick him in with someone like that. Someone who's got a bit of a reputation. Boxing fans know who he is. Make a couple of exciting fights. If you're not going to make big fights, make a few exciting fights that have that element of danger. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see Munguia fight fucking KSI or somebody like that. I don't know. It's a really weird career, and it's shocking how quick time passes. COVID. You lost 2 years. You lost a bit of time. He was 21, 22, and people were talking about him, but that was 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Time goes so quick for you and I as normal people. As professional athletes, it must go double quick.
Exactly. Yeah. Running off that card, a prospect for Golden Boy Promotions, Floyd Schofield, 12-0, goes up against Alberto Mercado, 17-4-1 for the WBA International Lightweight title. What do you think about this matchup, Craig?
I think it looks good. Schofield, I don't think he's done much wrong, has he? I think he's 12-0. I had a quick look earlier on. Managed by Cameron Davies, who's obviously got a good reputation as a manager as well. I think, I think it looks good when you're that young. He's only 20. You've had knockout wins. You've went 6, 7 rounds. I think he went 8 rounds as well. It's all about just getting that experience. I think it's for a WBA international title. I think Mercado, Mercado's decent. Mercado's no, it's not a walkover. He's been in some tough fights as well. I think it's good. It's good progression, mate. I don't really have much else to say. I'd be rambling, but it seems like a good step up.
Do we know if Mercado's still trained by Freddie Roach? Because he was at one point. I'm not sure if he is. Mike, do we know?
I don't know.
I think you're thinking of a different Alberto Mercado.
It's not the same one? He's not the same one who fought?
Yeah.
Oh, Machado. I'm thinking about Machado.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
Machado.
This guy's from Connecticut.
Oh, okay. I thought Machado. They're both Alberto. Okay, that's why. Because I thought Golden Boy, Machado, they had Machado as the world champ. He fought, who's the guy who went to Top Rank? And he's retired now, essentially.
We were there. He fought.
Yeah, we were there for all his fights and the wins in the desert.
He fought for the gas company.
He worked for the gas company during the week, and then he fought. Oh, why can't we remember his name? Oh my gosh! Why can't
Cancio. Andrew
Cancio. That's it. Yep.
Cancio. Yeah. Andrew Cancio. Yeah, that's who it was. Yeah, that's who I thought was this fighter, but it's Machado. So my mistake there. Moving on to news and notes of this week's episode of The Last Round. We touched on it a little bit, Craig. You touched on it right now with the Jaime Munguia potential opponents in the future. Edgar Berlanga and Top Rank have mutually agreed to part ways after months of talks that failed to resolve some key issues in their relationship. So You mentioned Munguia as a possible pathway. Maybe I'm assuming Golden Boy and Oscar De La Hoya would want. I believe De La Hoya actually tweeted something regarding Berlanga just after this news broke, saying, "Oh, I would love to work with him," or something like that. Where is the most realistic place for somebody like Berlanga to land at after this?
I could probably see. I could see him maybe with Golden Boy. I think there's a strong chance. There's probably a strong chance. I don't really know what the situation with Matchroom is at the moment in the States. I don't even know if they're still attempting to stamp some dominance in the States as a promotional outfit. I think the thing with Berlanga is he commands a decent crowd. So I think he's got that heritage. Is he Puerto Rican heritage? I think maybe.
I believe so, yes.
And he's kind of New York based, so he always seems to bring out a decent crowd. He's got a good following. So yeah, I think a Golden Boy would probably make sense, even if he's just used as an opponent. I probably can't see him going to it. I can't see him going to a Showtime, if I'm honest. It's a weird one, Berlanga, isn't it? Because he was the talk of the town, but then people started to very quickly understand that it was because he hadn't really fought anybody at a decent level. And I've seen a few things on Twitter kind of referencing that these talks have been stalled and reopened and stalled again, and now they've broken down. Is that because Top Rank were asking him to take a significant step up, and maybe he didn't fancy it or he didn't want to do it? So I don't know. His name still carries enough weight for him to make a little bit of money from the sport. I don't think he's a guy that's going to go on and win world titles.
Mike, what do you think about Berlanga and Top Rank parting ways?
I agree with Craig. I think he probably got told, like, hey, we're paying you like a decent amount of money. You need to step up, and start fighting some names. And he probably, didn't want to, especially after the last few performances that he had. Looking at where he's going to go, like looking at people, in and around, like, middleweight and super middleweight, Golden Boy, maybe PBC, because PBC like to do like the round robin, like Craig touched on earlier, like we'll keep the belts, and when this guy gets old, he'll fight him, and then we'll cycle them and keep doing internal fights. And, they have quite a lot of fighters in both of those divisions. So I could see him landing, PBC. And they like to do fights, obviously in the New York area, New York, Brooklyn area. And, there's obviously a big, Puerto Rican fan base over there. So it's kind of win-win for them.
That's true, yeah. It's a good point about PBC, doing a lot of fights, Brooklyn, Barclays Center, Connecticut, that whole area. Yeah, I can definitely see that. But I think De La Hoya is going to make a pitch for it too, as well, especially after that tweet. I think he's definitely going to make a pitch to try to sign him to a couple fights under his promotional banner. And then also, did you have something, Craig?
I was just going to say the PBC stuff. I think, if you can build him up a little bit more, he could be a decent opponent for a guy like a David Morrell or someone like that to fight at 168. So, if they maneuver him, he could play his part and be a decent away fighter, a decent opponent. But yeah,
that's a good point. Also, Stephen Fulton and the Monster Inoue have reportedly agreed to terms for a unified 122-pound title fight sometime this spring in Japan, according to ESPN. All right, Craig, this is we can't get too excited as boxing fans and, as members of the media here, because we always hear rumblings and stuff and reports, and, a good chunk of the time these fights never happen, and we get excited, and then we look back months later like, oh man, we were so excited and bought into the hype. What should we think about this type of news?
I think we should be excited. I don't know what you guys are like now, but with boxing the way it's been recently, my thing is I don't really believe it until they walk into the ring.
Yep.
I've got massive admiration for the way Inoue and his team seem to go about setting up fights. They just seem to get it done. Every time there never really seems to be an issue. It's let's get it made, and whatever it is they're doing it right, because whoever it is they're fighting, they're quite happy to go to Japan and fight in these stadiums in Japan as well. It never seems to be an issue. So I think it's great. I think there's probably a good chance of this fight happening, because I think there's a good chance that Stephen Fulton will see himself as winning this fight comfortably. Inoue, he fought Paul Butler recently. He probably didn't look himself. He didn't look his destructive self. He was landing shots, and Butler was there to survive to an extent. But, he didn't steamroll Butler the way that the majority of people thought he would. So now to move up again another few pounds, Fulton will be feeling great. This is like a massive legacy-defining fight for him. Cliche phrase, but I think we could see the fight happen. And, if it happens in Japan, we'll make ourselves some breakfast or something and we'll sit and watch it. We can 10 in the morning and enjoy it. Enjoy it for what it is. It's great. Inoue, whether you think he's lost a bit or he's moving up too far, he's exceptional to watch. He's so technically gifted, and Fulton's fantastic as well. Great fight.
Mike, what do you think about this potential matchup?
I mean, we were all calling for it, and surprisingly, we actually got it, because in boxing, normally the fights that we want don't get made until, the last minute. So, kind of like we touched on earlier, these lighter divisions, they seem to just get those fights done because those are the fights that make the big money. I can't wait to see it. If it is a Tuesday, unfortunately, we've got to wake up early to watch it, but I think it'll be worthwhile. And I think it really is a toss-up of, two of the greatest talents probably at 122. We got Inoue, the kind of technician, but also at the same time hugely powerful, and then you got Fulton, who's just all around great skill. So take my money, even if it's pay-per-view. I'll get up early and I'll pay and I'll watch it.
And then also reportedly, according to ESPN, former super middleweight world title holders David Benavidez and Caleb Plant will meet in a long-awaited fight on March 25th at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. This will be reportedly a Showtime pay-per-view event. Craig, same question as the one before. Are we going to see this? This one seems like it's going to be more likely that we'll see it. But do we see it? And if we do, who's your take on who comes out the victor in this fight?
I hope we see it. I'd love to see it. I think it's about time these guys fight. And I don't know who I think wins. I'll go Benavidez. I think Benavidez could stop Plant in the second half of the fight. Plant's very good, technically very good, slick. Benavidez, for me, I keep going back to that was it Porky Medina? Those machine gun combinations that he was rattling off Medina's skull. Obviously, Plant's far better than that, but it's about time for Benavidez's star to shine a little bit brighter, and I would pick him to win that fight.
And then also some news that was actually reported this morning. Tim Tszyu will fight Tony Harrison on the 12th of March in Australia on a venue that's to be announced at a later date. Tim Tszyu is a mandatory challenger for Jermell Charlo's undisputed world title. Charlo is currently injured, I believe. So what do you think about this potential matchup, Craig?
Love it. Love the fact that Tim Tszyu is willing to take it. He could sit and fight, an Australian farmer, and people would come and watch it and pay for it. But he doesn't want to. He wants to fight these guys, and he's ready to establish himself at that level. Harrison is so tricky, wily fighter. He's never the most exciting, the most explosive, but he's going to be in there winning rounds. I think it's a great fight, and it's a really, really good test ahead of a Charlo fight. Really, really good stuff.
What do you think about this matchup, Mike?
I'm a big fan of Tony Harrison. Love watching Tony Harrison, but he has that kind of James DeGale, hot and cold. If we get the hot Tony Harrison, destroys Tim Tszyu. Don't think Tim Tszyu is that good, to be honest with you. Tony Harrison beat Charlo, was beating Charlo the second time, decided to have his James DeGale, I'm just going to take a round off, lie on the ropes for a little bit, got caught, lost the fight. So we need the hot Tony Harrison, and I think he beats Tim Tszyu with ease, to be honest with you. But if he goes in cold, not really fancying it, thinking he can coast some rounds, then unfortunately, you take that risk, don't you, of getting caught or, thinking you're ahead on the cards when you're not, especially if you just said it's going to be in Australia, right? So he's probably 2 or 3 rounds down right now.
Yeah, that's true.
The weird thing with Harrison is he seems like one of those guys that isn't really that bothered about boxing either. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you watch him in a fight and you go, he doesn't even care. Like, he doesn't even want to be there really. He goes through the motions, but he's one of those guys, he's just sort of floats in and around the sport. But you're spot on what you say, Michael. If he's on, he's very, very hard to beat. He's so skilled. It just depends whether he turns up and whether his head's in the game and whether he still has that passion that he had 5 years ago when he was, when he was approaching a Charlo fight. It'd be interesting to see.
He looks like one of those guys that could probably just pick up a table tennis racket. He's amazing at table tennis.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
And then there's those guys that are like, train their ass off 24/7 and they think, if I had just a little drop of that natural talent that you had with my work ethic, I would be amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting. He's definitely fun to watch because he just has his on and off days.
Yeah, definitely. Craig, we definitely appreciate your valuable time here on the last round. We're glad that we can finally have you on after interacting for so long on the social media channels, especially on Boxing Twitter. But before we let you go, before we conclude this week's episode of the last round, go ahead and let everybody know, all of our listeners listening, where they can find your work, where they can, find any of your content online. Go for it, man.
Yeah, so at the moment, my stuff will be on boxingzombie.uk, which is my own site. We'll be putting some interesting interviews on there, some articles and some content. Boxing News, the magazine on sale here in the UK. So write the occasional feature on there, which is great platform. And that's about it, guys. You can get me on Twitter at CraigScott209. I think that's as exciting as it gets, to be honest. But thanks for having me on again. Really appreciate it, guys.
Definitely. And then before I throw it to you, Mike, the great Muhammad Ali's birthday just passed on January 17th. So he would have been 81 years old if he was still living today. So happy birthday to the great Muhammad Ali. Mike, you know the drill. Before we completely sign off, go ahead and let them know where they can find us and follow us.
We are at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter. And be sure to join us next week where we'll be reviewing the Tundi Ajay fight week. That's all we're talking about next week. It's probably going to be 3-4 hour long episode.
Probably. We'll just play excerpts of his interviews throughout fight week, right?
Yep, that's enough. It'll be biggest ever listened episode, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So for our guest of the week in boxing writer Craig Scott, for my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.